thanks for coming. We'll have people coming in and out. I want to spend a few minutes introducing Basilios Poulos to you and to this group of paintings that are all very recent. In fact, this is the oldest painting. The show could almost begin here, but I'll let the boss talk about that and then kind of go around and talk briefly about the paintings. And then, like we always do with these things, we want questions and answers from you guys. This isn't a formal lecture, but it's a casual talk. And so to begin with, I want to just let you know a little bit. Brochures are on the way. Sheila's coming in a few minutes, but we'll get the talk out of the way first. I've been aware of Basilios almost from the beginning when I first came to Texas. It took quite a few years to meet him. But when I was at the Art Museum in South Texas, Boss has been to shows, important shows over the years here in Houston. He taught at the university, at Rice University for many years. He retired in 2008 and now works as a full-time painter. And this group of paintings, there's two parts to them, and that's about all I'll say, and then I'll let Boss talk. They're the paintings, these five along this wall are the Greek bridges. And then the other paintings that you see along that wall, they're all from South Carolina, where his family has property. So these are known properties. They're not things that he's not familiar with because he has walked through this landscape and then translated it into his own quasi-abstract manner, which with very bright, beautiful colors. So, anyway, please welcome Basilios, and we'll talk a little bit about his work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And first of all, I want to thank Laura and Michael and Jim and HBU for having the wonderful opportunity to show recent paintings here at HBU. As Jim mentioned, I'm a retired professor emeritus from Rice University, where I taught for something like 30 years, drawing and painting. Rice does have an art department. Well, they actually HBU has an art department. So anyway, and I was reminded of one of the things Jim said. I don't know if you know the art blog here in town called The Great God Pan is Dead. It's written by Robert Boyd, or he's the blog master. Come on in if you like. I mentioned this blog, the art blog by Robert Boyd, who was one of my students at Rice. And art and writing have to go together. But this blog, art blog, is called The Great God Pan is Dead. You can find it on the internet. And there are two articles. One written by Robert Boyd, visiting my studio here in town with some illustrations, some of the work here. And then a more recent article, a couple days ago, a woman named Virginia Anderson wrote a very nice article about me with a lot of my Greek stories. Okay? So, as an introduction, I'm a Greek storyteller that happens to paint the stories. And as Jim mentioned, the paintings over here, the Greek landscapes, I have had the good fortune of building a small studio house in the Peloponnese, where my father's village is, and my mother's village, in Laconia. That's where the word laconic comes from, near Sparta. And in this mountain village is my father's. I've constructed a village house, a studio house. And I've been there over 30, almost 40 times to Greece, and I've stayed, in the studio doing sabbaticals and things like that. And several years ago, I started noticing old stone bridges. You know what an old river is in the meandering of an old river like the Mississippi? And then the water seeks the straightest path, creating what you would call elbow lakes. If you fly over the Mississippi, you'll see these elbow lakes. The same thing happens when they take an old road and they follow the side of the mountain, they go into the ravine, and at the end of the ravine, they build a bridge, and then they continue around the ravine. In the last decade, with earth moving equipment, they've straightened the roads out. And the ravine is cut off. And I started noticing these old stone bridges in the ravines. So I started drawing and photographing these bridges. Consequently, I'm having a show in Greece, perhaps this year, maybe starting next year, at a couple of small museums in the Peloponnese of these bridge paintings. Coming back here, my studio's in town, I started painting bridge paintings. As Jim mentioned, the one behind Steph here is called Bridge Painting, and it's the oldest painting, 2010. You see the bridge. It's a very famous bridge. There's a river that goes north-south, cuts the Peloponnese in half, called Lucius. It's a very famous river, and this is one of the bridges that's there near an archaeological site called Gordius. I've painted this bridge many times, and I have walked on both sides of the bridge. This happens to be the side facing west with the sun coming down, and that's why you have the light under the bridge and the sun coming through with the blue water and the silhouette of trees. Now, let's move on to this one, which is 2012 and 13. This is another bridge hidden away. Here is the arch of the bridge, and again, the sun is coming through the bridge, creating a silvery surface to the water. So that's how you relate to that. The bridge is disappearing here. There was nothing here. Trees on both sides, a seasonal riverbed, creek bed. So these three paintings represent the closest to the bridges. I decided to do some tapestries. And the first two tapestries I've done are the ones over here. Let's walk through here. I'm just going to walk through the show, and then, as Jim mentioned, I'd like for you to have any questions. I'd be happy to discuss anything with you. But look at these two painted tapestries. I have a roll of canvas, 84 inches wide, the roll of canvas. And this is the edge of the roll. This is called the selvage edge. Forgive me, I'm talking like a professor now. I don't need to tell you all this information. Anyway, this is the edge of the lumen. So I went to a cell maker in Seabrook, and he stitched that, and he stitched that, a little loop. I tacked it on my studio wall, and these are the last two paintings that deal with the Greek. Here is part of the arch of the bridge. And here is the remnants of the bridge here. So I'm painting them on the wall, thinking I'm going to hang loose. With Steph, 2 days ago, is it yesterday? 2 days ago, we hung these. For the first time, I'm seeing them hung. These are conduits. Leftover conduit pipes when I was building my studio. So, ran through, hung. I think they really look good. Amazing. Picture. Look, you can't improve on nature. I was an abstract painter for a long time. It's hard to maintain an abstraction that is valid enough, not a zombie abstraction. There's a term like that. Unless you have a critical theory, like Mondrian, the theory of Mondrian, if you've known his paintings and other people, Kandinsky and so forth. I gave up abstraction and I returned to nature. These are abstract landscapes. The color is the remnant from the formal abstractions that I made. But I also started looking at painters who painted nature. Cézanne, Matisse, Bonnard. And there's a painting here in Houston in the Beck collection of the MFAH by the French painter André Derain. Major fauve painter. If you don't know the word, look it up. He was a fauve.
F-A-U.
It means wild beast. It was a critical term that a critic gave to this group of artists, Matisse, Derain, so forth. Short period of time, only about 2 years, and they shook up the art world in Paris. The Beck collection painting of André Derain's called The Turning Road is a masterpiece. Go and see it. If they have, and they've had a retrospective of Derain, it's not a valid retrospective unless they can persuade the MFAH to lend them the painting, because that's a masterpiece. MoMA, the modern, has a smaller version, same painting. If you are able to see both of them, you suddenly realize this idea of painting the subject matter over and over. That's what I'm doing. Okay. Now the fauves gave me the idea of intensifying the color, removing it from being a graphic sense, dark color. What's a dark color to you students? Green. What's a light color? Yellow. So if you paint green and yellow, you're essentially painting contrast as opposed to the optical idea of color. So that's what a lot of these paintings deal with. I'm also a believer in the idea of observing the landscape. Picasso said he observes the landscapes. Matisse paints the landscape in the landscape. Picasso observed the landscape and went into his studio and painted landscapes at night. I take it one step further, to coin a phrase. I walk the landscape. So I have walked all this landscape. Everybody over here, look at this side. Jim mentioned my family has land in South Carolina, in the foothills of the Blue Ridge, 300 acres, and I walk the landscape. So the first one is this one down here, Noonday Garden. We'll try and get, or if we get it from Sheila, we'll try and get some of the photographs of these landscapes. that can show you, and I like actually winter landscapes because the foliage is down and you have the drawing of the trees. And this is in the bright midday, the sun with the branches of the trees and so forth. And as you can see, it goes in a certain way depending on the time of day, the luminosity. Okay, so I'm also a painter of light. So you got landscape, you got luminosity, the color. There's one odd painting here. It's called Window to the Landscape. And this painting here is an homage to Pierre Bonnard. There's a painting of Pierre Bonnard's that is at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. I have seen at least 3 retrospectives of Pierre Bonnard, a wonderful painter. And he, in addition to doing these figures of his wife, his muse, Martha, he also does still lifes and landscapes. And there's several paintings. There's one that I look at all the time at the Modern that has still lifes. Then there's large windows. And you look through the windows and you see the landscape. So what I have done is I have reduced the landscape to the green, and here is the architectural window. Window to the landscape. Homage to Pierre Bonnard. I'll speak about one more painting and then we'll open it up. This is a diptych. I've done a lot of diptychs, but this is the first diptych that I've done that's a landscape. And this comes from, I left South Carolina. I'm a very old man. I left South Carolina in the 60s. And in the 70s, they designated a part of the Congaree River, that's about 40 miles right outside Columbia, South Carolina. And it's called the Congaree River Basin. It's a national park in mid-70s. So I discovered this park. So I walked through the wetlands. So this is the one painting that is from that landscape. The slanted trees, the log, the sun coming through the trees, and so forth. So this is called Congaree River Basin right there. And it's a diptych. The physical edge right here. When I was painting this, it wasn't connected. So I painted this. If you buy this painting, I'll let you.
You can do it.
It's only connected at the top and bottom by ending edges.
Yeah.
Enough of my stories. Questions? Comments?
When you start your process, the outlines that I see in your work, is it graphite or is it charcoal? And also, if you start with a raw canvas, or do you treat your canvas before you paint?
Good questions.
I want to add to that. You love watercolor like Richard and Jen and all of us do. Do you do also watercolors in preparation or collages?
Yes. In reference to your question, though, these are all acrylic paintings. Acrylic painting. Okay. It's a water-based medium. What Michael says, I'm also a watercolor, so that's a water-based medium. But I start these paintings with charcoal. I use a dark charcoal stick, and you can see the renderings of the charcoal. And in fact, some of the most recent paintings that are not in the show now, I am loosening up by leaving some of the charcoal lines to show through. So the painting is painted on cotton duck canvas without gesso, with charcoal. And then I come back and paint with the acrylic on top of the charcoal and so forth, okay? Now, I paint canvas on the wall or canvas on a panel. Only an artist can do this with his own work. I must be able to do this. This is a membrane. It has give and take. I don't paint on the painting when it's stretched. I paint on the canvas stapled to the wall, or stapled to plywood, or stapled to panels, because I like, when I'm painting, to have a hard surface. Plus, I don't want the bracing. If you paint and you push the canvas and you make a mark, you can't get rid of that brace mark. It's difficult to get rid of the brace mark. Hans Hofmann has used those brace marks as part of the painting. Brilliant solution, right? It's the only solution. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Why did it come all of a sudden?
Yes. Excuse me?
Why did it pick all of a sudden?
That's a good question. You don't want to be bored in your studio. So if you notice, there are only two sizes, the hanging pieces. But the one in the corner there is a 3x4, 36 by 48. And then the larger ones are 48 by 60. So these are actually two 36 by 48s. So I had these two panels, and I decided to put them together.
Serendipity?
Well, as I said, I painted diptychs a lot earlier. So I just returned to the diptych. And that's actually one way to make the painting larger. And, you know, you can move it in and out very easily. That answer your question?
Absolutely.